Hi guys, this is Dr. Aeronautics and welcome to my landing tutorial. What's that? The fool who failed landings 5 times in a row in his new tutorial series is going to teach you a landing? That's right, because I'm an intelligent and adaptable human being just like you. So this tutorial is exclusively devoted to landings. We're here at Bangor International in northeastern Maine in the United States, the site of my most recent failed landing attempt. And I can tell you, we definitely already have an issue with, it comes with the addition of 3-dimensional terrain in Orbiter. As you can see, the terrain is not flat. While we're taxiing, I can do 2 of the things now. Step 1 deals with the landing weight. There is no restriction on what your landing weight is, even though I've said it in the past, so just ignore it. Second, obtain the ILS frequency of where you want to land before you come in. Go to Info, go to Base, choose your base, Bangor International, and it's going to be runway 13, and that corresponds with an ILS of 109.50. So what you want to do is, on one of the MFDs, go to Select Com Nav, and dial in the frequency that you read off. And there we go, runway 13, Bangor International. So now it comes up, go to select HSI, and now you can see there is your ILS indicator. And we're actually going to put this on this display and switch this one to our primary flight display. Is that actually its name? No, it's a Surface MFD, but it performs the same function. I'm going to put this one on tracking camera. Alright, so there's no real way to teach this in Glide. You kind of have to learn how to do it in a regular old... yeah, the runway is like tilted. You kind of need to learn how to do it in a traffic pattern fashion, and then eventually you'll learn how to do it once you get the hang of it. Wow, that's a scary downhill. Not fully realistic. So a good traffic pattern velocity is 250 meters per second. Retracted. But it really won't help you out that much when you're doing this in a full-on glide, as I demonstrated in my last tutorial. So let's pretend, you know, we're flying along, we re-entered, and okay, we have some fuel left. That's fine. Or maybe you want to cheat and disable fuel usage. You can do that too, right? So let's pretend that you didn't burn any fuel because you decided that you don't need fuel to fly. What you want to do is get into a downwind. So you open up the HSI, and now we find that we're heading away from the airport, and it's runway 13. So we fly the opposite of that, which is 31. I know that sounds a little bit messed up, but that's the only case is 13 and 31 are reversed due to 180 degree subtraction. It's pretty funny. Oh, look at all these pine trees. So many lakes and pine trees. It's like upper Minnesota. So as you can see, I'm starting this with my landing gear up. just keep an eye on that nav1 HSI, and when you see that turn around, you know that you're there. I'm going to release the stick at this point because you want to leave adequate turnaround space for your base leg. Otherwise, we'd be turning directly into final, which is kind of risky. You risk a bad approach of doing that. So one good practice would be to turn downwind before you're fully there. That way you're about 185 degrees out from the runway, and thus you're widening it. Keep an eye on this distance, which you see ticking down, and take note of where it bottoms out, because you're going to use this to identify exactly how far out you want to fly. Okay, so there's the base down there. Okay, so this is step 2, fly the downwind. We're just going to keep flying, and we've just bottomed out at 10.5 kilometers. So we have a 10.5 kilometer base. If we use a 10-to-1 glide slope, actually there's no way it's going to be that steep. Maybe it's 5-to-1. So I'm at about 3.3 kilometers, which is 10,000 feet. That's a good traffic pattern altitude to use in the Delta glider. So for a really solid approach, I would say a 5-to-1, actually a 10-to-1 glide slope, which would be 30 kilometers. Now keep in mind we're offset by 12 kilometers. So I'm going to do Pythagorean's theorem to figure out 12.5 squared plus the distance out we want to be, which is 30 kilometers squared, and we find once we are 32.5 kilometers out from the base, then we're going to turn base. I know that sounds a little bit funny, but the base leg is basically where we start to turn around to face the runway, and we level out 90 degrees from it. Again, I'm using a 10-to-1 glide slope ratio. So 3 kilometers in altitude means we should be 30 kilometers from the base. And we've actually lost the signal at this point, so we've got no choice. We actually have to turn base at this point. So you want to turn 90 degrees from your active runway, so that's 1-3. So add 1-3 and 1-8. Actually, no, it's add 1-3 and 9. So it's going to be 2-2-0 is going to be our base. Now this is going to be a little bit visual. At this point, I'm starting to reduce a little bit of throttle. It's a little bit visual in the sense that we don't have ILS just yet. We're a little bit too far out for this. I'm trying to get a really good approach set up, because one of the things that you probably see a lot in my early tutorials thus far have been a commonality of not lining up properly. Lining up is everything. If you're a real world pilot and you don't line up within like 1 nautical mile, that's it, you're go around. You don't care what it is. Okay. So at this point, we've lined up with the runway. So we're turning final, which means we're lining up with the runway, and we're going to line up so that we're 100% lined up. We've now achieved ILS. So we're 28 kilometers. I'm going to cut the throttle at this point. We'll put it back on as needed. But for now, I would say 190 meters per second would be a good final speed for the time being. We will adjust that downwards as necessary. Again, remember what I said about the crosshairs. You want where you're going, not where you're pointed,
2500.
to be lined up with the runway. Okay. Right about now, as you can see on the ILS, the displays are aligning. So what we want to do now is pull that heading indicator, the prograde velocity vector, up with the runway. And again, I don't have any engines. I'm engine cut off right now. So step 3 is to fly the base. Step 4 is to fly the final. At about 200 meters per second, you're go to put the gear down. Now keep in mind when you do that, you're going to have to compensate either with a steeper glide slope or with more throttle. So step 5, deploy the gear, is complete. Should check for 3 lock lights, and we got them. Again, keep that prograde velocity vector on the runway.
1000.
Step 6 is to touchdown at 160 meters per second. Keep an eye on the front of your aircraft. Of the runway. You want touchdown velocity at approximately 160 meters per second. I'm going to reduce throttle, and when we touch down, very gently let the nose come down. Then as soon as you're fully on the ground, we're going to deploy the air brake fully, and below 100 meters per second, we're going to deploy, or we're going to add the wheel brake. Again, keep that prograde velocity vector on the runway. I'm looking at the front of the runway. We're going to aim to touch down at those 2 white marks after the threshold. So just keep an eye. We're getting really close to the point where we want to do a flare. Start flaring. That's it. Chop the throttle. And we've made touchdown. And unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. That was perfect. That would have been butter in every single definition of the meaning. So let's go ahead and demonstrate this at Cape Canaveral, which is the runway that you're supposed to be landing at in the stock version of Orbiter. Okay, so here is the almost exact same approach at Cape Canaveral. This is runway 33, which is the runway that you're supposed to use, and the one that comes vanilla with Orbiter, and therefore would have all of the correct gradients, and most importantly would have been tested. So this one is supposed to work. So I see the runway, the front of the runway and the back of the runway are not lined up, so we're going to go a bit to the right to line those up, but not too far, because remember we have to come back at some point. Got a pretty good approach so far. Okay, we're about level with the runway now, so we're going to bring that prograde velocity vector out onto the front of the runway. We're going to aim for the threshold, and then when you flare, you're going to overshoot it, and we'll touch down approximately where we want to. There now. So we've got it perfectly aligned. Gears down and locked.
400.
Keep an eye on that landing speed. We want about 160.
300. 200.
Okay, as the threshold begins to go out of sight below you, you want to look to the end of the runway.
100.
Now here
50,
we begin our flare.
40, 30, 20, 10.
There we go, chop the power. Okay. And now we retract the air brake. Deploy the air brakes is what I meant to say. And then very slowly tap those wheel brakes. We don't want to induce a spin, but make sure you tap them at the same time. Okay, and now we're below it. So there you go. Okay, we've come to a stop at Cape Canaveral. So that's it. You let me just say this. Orbiter is not liable for any damages that occur if you land on any off-vanilla runway. So that's what's going on. You just got to stick to the vanilla runways. We would have landed perfectly straight too if it weren't for me tapping the apostrophe key and the M key. So what happened was I tapped the M key first, or I tapped the M and apostrophe keys. M doesn't do anything. The apostrophe key causes the left wheel brake to come on, so that's why we veered off of the runway a little bit early. I mean, we're still on it. It's just we're off of the striped portion of the runway. So guys, that's how you do a proper landing. You gotta use a vanilla runway. I personally don't give a darn with this aircraft or with this spacecraft because it doesn't blow up when you land. You can just reset it. But I'm curious to see what would happen if I attempted to land the Delta Glider 4 or XR2 aircrafts here, which are much more realistic. We might have some issues with that. If that's the case, I will have to test every runway that I intend to use in the future and hope that most of the runways are not broken like Bangor is. Now, Bangor is kind of in a rugged area, so perhaps we can excuse the fact that it's not easy to land on. But there are some ones, such as Indianapolis International, that I'm a little concerned about, right? Because that's pretty flat farmland. Don't forget to retract your air brakes when you're done with them. Oh, man.
Door closed.
Someone needs to get on fixing those call-outs because it's completely irritating. XR2 does not have these issues. Anyway, guys, I hope this helped you out. This has been Dr. Aeronautics, and I will see you guys next time. We're going into orbit. Bye-bye.